In Knucklehead today, we are going to read Chapter 8, Crossing Swords. Now, I wonder if any of you guys have heard that phrase before, crossing swords. It's a term I think that maybe some of you boys have heard before. I thought this chapter was very funny. Here's a picture of all of 6 Shiska brothers dressed up for Christmas. You can tell it's Christmas by the manger scene on the mantelpiece. It was a nice little wooden house with statues of Mary and Joseph, 3 wise men, a mess of animals, and the baby Jesus, who got put in on Christmas Day. Mom always tried to make it look nice with banks of cotton snow, but Jim and I like to add some extra touches. We would pose the 3 wise men fighting the camels, or we would sneak Davy Crockett or a couple of army machine gunners into the scene. Maybe a guy with a bazooka hiding behind the sheep. We thought it made a much livelier Christmas story. This is a pretty classic pose for everyone. Jim, as usual, is doing his best to look the most grown up. He's got a real tie and he knows it. The rest of us got stuck wearing another one of Mom's experimental fashion ideas. He's talking about this picture right here. See that? Experimental fashion ideas. He's wearing the only real tie. I couldn't get it together enough to bother arguing, so I'm wearing the experiment. Tom is messing around with something in his pocket and not posing like he's supposed to. Greg is smiling about a joke he hasn't told anyone, but he sure is very funny. Brian is not happy that he got rustled into nice clothes and has to sit on half of Greg's chair. And Jeff, as the youngest, is plopped down in front of everyone else, in his own world, not really sure what he is doing here, doing weird things with his fingers in his lap. There aren't many pictures like this of all of us together, mostly because it was such a challenge to ever get everyone together for anything. Going to church on Sunday, Mom and Dad would first make sure Jim and I were dressed and ready. They would put us in the car with Brian and Jeff to make sure they didn't wander off. Then they would try to corral Tim and Greg before any of us escaped. Once we were all in the car ready to leave, someone always had to go to the bathroom. "You just went," Dad would say. "I have to go again," Greg would say. And once the idea had been mentioned, it just seemed like a good idea for everyone. "I'm going too," Jim would say. "Me too," I would say. "I don't want to pee," Tom would say. "We don't say pee," Mom would say, "and everyone is going to the bathroom right now." As a nurse, Mom was big on using the correct terms for bodily functions. We would urinate and we might pass gas, but we never took a leak or popped a fart, though somehow it was okay to drain your radiator. We never asked why. And since it would take forever to wait for 6 of us to go to the bathroom individually, and because we had the anatomy to make it possible, we would usually go 2 or 3 or 4 of us at a time. That worked out great for speed, not so great for accuracy. Remember what accuracy means? Accuracy means like if it's correct. So if they're talking about not so great for accuracy, they're talking about whether or not they aimed and got it in. So during one of our group efforts, Jim and I realized that crossing streams was kind of like sword fighting. And so it was for every time after. "Sword fight!" one of us would yell, and we would cross streams back and forth. Tom would join in. Greg, Brian, and Jeff were always a lot shorter, and unfortunately for them, had to stand a lot closer to the group sword fighting toilet. "Mom!" yelled Greg. "Jim and John just peed on me!" "Urinated," said Mom. "We didn't pee on him," said Jim. "Didn't urinate on him," said Mom. "We were just sword fighting," I said. "What?" said Mom. "All you knuckleheads just get in the car," said Dad. Chapter 9 is called Schooling. This is a little picture of him. I went to Catholic schools from 1st grade to 9th grade. I didn't really like the whole idea of going to school. I would have been fine just staying home and playing around, But my older brother Jim got dressed up and went to school, so I knew I would be doing the same thing the next year. That's how the world worked. Kindergarten turned out to be surprisingly fun. The teacher played the piano and sang. We got to play in sand, color pictures, and take naps. Once I got to first grade, the school business got serious. Learning colors, numbers, letters, words, science, math, grades. The schools weren't big, but the classes were huge. Look at those pictures. There were at least 40 kids in every class. Look at that. That's a big class. Can you imagine having a class of that many kids? We started every day with a prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance. Then the teacher took attendance. My teachers would usually say John Skizika, John Skyzeka, or just say John, I learned to just wait until after Tommy Schmidt's name was called. Then, when the teacher said John, I would instantly say, here. Shiska is also a real challenge to spell, so I signed my name John S. until about second grade or so. The two schools I went to, St. Agnes and St. Luke, were run by nuns in full habits. That's what they call those robes and head coverings they wore. And I also wondered why they called them that. Like it was just a bad habit to wear the same thing every day, or maybe a good habit. Most of the teachers were nuns. The principal was a nun, and we learned that nuns were married to God, so there was no arguing with nuns. They were God's wife, so they were always right. Most of the nuns were pretty scary. We did what they said, because we were afraid they would whack us or use some secret nun power on us or tell their husband to hit us with a bolt of lightning. But there were friendly nuns, like Sister Helen Jude. She was the nicest teacher in the whole school. She would laugh at our knucklehead fourth grade jokes. She would ask us about the comics we were reading. She wanted to know what we were thinking, and we loved her for that. Every boy in fourth grade would have married her in a second if she hadn't already been married to you-know-who. So instead, we showed our love by doing whatever Sister Helen Jude did. She liked to draw, we drew. She had beautiful handwriting. We actually worked on her handwriting. She led the choir, so unlikely as it might seem, almost every guy joined the choir. Jim, being the oldest brother, always had to be the best and most in everything. He became head choir boy. That's him. Second row, sixth from the left. See, look, there he is. Being second oldest, I was fine with just being in the choir. I'm in the third row, third from the right. Right there. As the third oldest brother, Tom got dragged into a lot of things just because Jim and I were doing them. He's sitting in the front row, fifth from the left. Poor Tom. Under Sister Helen Jude's heavenly direction, we learned to sing in Latin, in 4-part harmony. Hard to believe that she could get those amazing sounds out of our most unlikely group. This picture is proof that the power of love is stronger than the power of fear. So what an interesting story that he went to a church school and was taught by nuns. Tomorrow we're going to read more. Until then.